heavy silence filled the night. The moon hid behind the restless clouds, as if it, too, sensed an approaching storm. In this uneasy darkness, an old, broken house stood still, its walls soaked with sorrow. Inside, a man lay awake, staring at the ceiling with exhausted, hollow eyes. This was Karam Din, a father crushed under the weight of fate, a man who had faced nothing but misery. His life was not just a sad tale, it was a battlefield. A war only a father could fight, for the sake of his daughters. His entire world revolved around Salma, Rukhsana, and Jamila, 3 innocent flowers, craving love and care. But in this cruel world, they had no one except Karam Din. His wife had passed away 5 years ago due to an illness. Back then, life was tough but bearable. Now, it was nothing less than a raging storm. Karam Din was a daily wage laborer. Some days, he found work, other days, he returned home empty-handed. But his daughter's love had kept him going. He had no idea that the biggest test of his life was yet to come. That evening, after working tirelessly, Karam Din walked to the market to buy food. But his pockets were empty. The sky wept with him, raindrops soaking his worn-out clothes. Yet, the storm inside him was fiercer than the one outside. "Father, did you bring food?" Salma, the eldest, asked in a soft voice. Karam Din forced a smile. "The rain ruined everything today. Tomorrow will be better." But his daughters saw the pain in his eyes. That night, little Jamila cried from hunger. She was just 4 years old, too young to understand hardship. Karam Din's heart broke. He told Salma and Rukhsana, "Give her some water, my child. Tomorrow, I will bring food for you all." Sleep abandoned the family that night. Hunger had stolen their peace. Karam Din knew if things continued like this, the fight wouldn't just be for food, it would become a fight for survival. The next day, Karam Din searched for work again. But the only thing he found was humiliation. The rich landlord, Seth Rauf, the wealthiest man in the area, laughed in his face. "Ha ha! You again, Karam Din? Still begging for work?" He smirked. "Listen, if you send your eldest daughter, Salma, to work in my house, I'll reward you well." Karam Din's blood boiled. His daughter was not a commodity to be traded. Clenching his fists, he replied, "I am a poor laborer, but I will never sell my daughter's dignity. God is the provider of all sustenance." Seth Rauf chuckled coldly. "Let's see how long you survive with this fatherly pride." Karam Din turned away, knowing he had just made a dangerous enemy. But he had no idea that this was just the beginning of a much darker nightmare. That evening, hunger and desperation filled his home. The pain in his daughter's eyes crushed him. He realized if he didn't find a way soon, they wouldn't just suffer, they would starve. As the night deepened, Karam Din made a grave decision. He had to do something. Anything. The next morning, he set off for the city, hoping for a miracle. But what awaited him there was another cruel trial. Karam Din wandered through the city, searching for work. As he passed through a market filled with thieves and beggars, he saw 4 men attacking a woman. They kicked her to the ground, mercilessly beating her. Karam Din's heart clenched. "Why are you doing this? Leave her alone," he shouted. One of the thugs sneered. "Who are you to interfere?" Then, without warning, he slapped Karam Din across the face. Blood trickled from Karam Din's lips. The darkness was growing denser. In the city's black market, Karam Din lay surrounded by 5 ruthless thugs. His face was covered in blood, his lips were torn, but still, he refused to fall. His thoughts were only of his daughters, Salma, Rukhsana, Jamila. Their hunger, their innocence, their helpless laughter. If he gave up today, his daughters would starve to death tomorrow. This thought sent a new surge of strength through his body. "Man, we should just kill this old man." One of the thugs pulled out a knife. Another laughed mockingly. "Run, old man, or we'll bury you right here." But Karam Din had no intention of stepping back. He closed his eyes, took a deep breath, and gathered whatever strength remained in him. And then, a powerful punch landed right on the face of the nearest thug. As the thug fell, another one lunged forward, but Karam Din threw his broken sandal straight at his face. Before the third could grab him, a woman suddenly picked up a wooden stick from the ground and struck one of the thugs on the head. The same woman who had been lying on the ground moments ago, beaten and helpless. With her help, Karam Din unleashed a storm of punches and kicks. He knew that if he lost today, there would be no one left for his daughters. After a brief but intense fight, the thugs ran away. The woman was wounded, but her eyes held both gratitude and sorrow. "You saved my life," she said in a weak voice. Karam Din extended his hand. "And you saved mine. Now tell me, where is your home?" Tears welled up in the woman's eyes. "I have no home." Saying this, she collapsed into unconsciousness. Karam Din lifted the woman onto his back and carried her beyond the city, to an old mosque where weary travelers often rested. There, he washed her face. The splashes of water revived her. "Are you all right?" Karam Din asked. The woman nodded weakly. "My name is Surah. I am just as helpless as you are, a woman without a home, just as you are a father without shelter." Karam Din stared at her. "Do you know me?" Surah gave a faint smile. "No, but one helpless soul can always recognize another." Karam Din felt the weight of her words. His heart told him that this woman was not ordinary. Life had deceived her in some terrible way, but it wasn't the right time to ask. Surah took a deep breath and said, "Why are you enduring all this pain?" Sadness flooded Karam Din's eyes. He told her everything about his daughters, their hunger, their innocence, and how he would do anything to provide for them. Surah thought for a moment, then said, "I must help you." Karam Din looked at her in shock. "But how can you help me?" Surah replied, "There is a place where you can work. A wealthy man hires laborers, but there is one condition." Karam Din asked, "Condition?" Surah exhaled deeply. "The man's name is Seth Rauf." Seth Rauf, the same man who had mocked Karam Din's dignity. The man who saw his daughter as an object for his own desires. Karam Din clenched his teeth. "I will not go to him." Surah spoke softly, "Then will you let your daughters starve?" The words pierced Karam Din's heart like an arrow. He stood still for 5 moments, and then spoke just one word. "Take me to him." The next day, Surah led Karam Din to Seth Rauf's grand mansion. Seth Rauf saw him from a distance and smirked. "See? I told you, you would return." Karam Din lowered his head. "I need work." Seth Rauf laughed. "You'll get a laborious job, but on one condition." Karam Din asked in a defeated voice, "What condition?" Seth Rauf's wicked eyes gleamed as he said, "You must send your eldest daughter, Salma, to work in my house." Hearing these words, Karam Din's blood boiled. His heart screamed to punch Seth Rauf and break his face. But then, he remembered his daughter's hunger. Their helplessness. He clenched his fists. Karam Din stood in silence, his head bowed. A storm raged inside him. Seth Rauf's demand, that his daughter Salma work in his house, wasn't just about work. It was arrogance, revenge, humiliation. But desperation is just another form of slavery. Karam Din thought, "If I refuse, what will happen to my starving daughters?" But if he agreed, would he still be worthy of being called a father? Seth Rauf laughed, enjoying Karam Din's suffering. "What are you thinking, old man?" Seth sneered. "Time is running out. Either say yes, or prepare to die of hunger." Karam Din's throat went dry. His daughters' hungry faces flashed before his eyes. Salma's innocent smile, Ruxana's cheerful laugh, Jamila's teary eyes. He took a deep breath. And then, he spoke just one word. "No." Seth Rauf's face turned red with anger. He stood up from his chair and stepped closer. "Say that again," he roared. Karam Din steadied his heart. "I will not send my daughter to a filthy man like you." Seth Rauf exploded in fury. "Then starve to death." He raised his hand as if to strike Karam Din, but just then, a voice rang out. "Enough!" It was Surah. Seth Rauf turned sharply. "Stay out of this, woman." Surah stepped forward, her eyes blazing. Don't push a desperate father into a corner. If you need workers, give him another way to earn the money. Seth Ralph paused, then a cruel smirk spread across his face. All right, he said slowly. One last condition. Karam Din braced himself. What is it? Seth Ralph folded his arms. Bring me 100 rupees by tomorrow, or your daughter will work for me. 100 rupees? In today's time, that was equal to a fortune. Karam Din's shoulders slumped. 100 rupees. Where would he find such an amount? Karam Din couldn't sleep all night. He had only one night to gather 100 rupees. But how? Would he beg? No. Would he take up a job? No job could pay that much in a single day. There was only one way left: theft. But could a respectable father become a thief? A war raged inside him. But as the sun began to rise, his decision was made. If I don't steal, Salma will fall into Seth Ralph's hands. He swallowed his pride. And as the night fell again, he stepped out into the city's dark alleys. But Karam Din didn't know. Someone was watching him. A shadow followed his every move. Karam Din moved stealthily through the dark alleys, his heart pounding like a beating drum. He had never stolen anything in his life, but tonight, he had no other choice. If he failed to bring 100 rupees, Salma would be forced into servitude under Seth Ralph. May Allah forgive me, he whispered a silent prayer. But this is only to protect my daughter's honor. But would fate stand by his side this time? Karam Din entered a wealthy neighborhood. The people here slept early. Silence ruled the streets, except for the distant barking of stray dogs. His eyes fell on a grand mansion. The house was dark inside. Everyone was asleep. Karam Din steadied his breath, steeled his nerves, and began climbing the wall. But just as he placed his foot inside, "Catch him! Thief!" A loud scream. Before Karam Din could flee, someone grabbed his wrist with an iron grip. It was a young man, holding onto Karam Din's arm with all his strength. His shouts had awakened the entire neighborhood. "Thief! Thief! Thief!" Doors burst open. People rushed out, wielding sticks and rods. Karam Din pleaded in his heart. "Let me go. My daughter's fate depends on this." But no one listened. They started beating him. Sticks, punches, kicks. Pain engulfed him from all sides. The blows rained down until Karam Din collapsed, unconscious. But fate's cruel game was not over yet. Because the man who now examined his face was one of Seth Ralph's men. "Take him to the police station," the man smirked. Seth Ralph would love to see this. When Karam Din regained consciousness, his hands were shackled with iron chains. In front of him stood Seth Ralph, an eerie smirk stretched across his face. "So, this is your honor?" Seth Ralph chuckled coldly. "You became a thief?" "Ha!" Karam Din lowered his gaze, his heart heavy with shame. "I was helpless," he murmured in a broken voice. "It was a matter of my daughter's dignity." Seth Ralph stepped closer. "Now, let me make you another offer," he whispered cruelly. "If you want your daughters to survive, not just Salma but Rukhsana and Jamila too will serve in my house." Darkness clouded Karam Din's vision. On one side was humiliation. On the other, hunger and the slow death of poverty. But was there any path left for him now? Had fate truly abandoned him tonight? Karam Din lay on the ground, his face smeared with blood, his clothes torn, and his heart unbearably heavy. He had tried everything to survive, but fate had abandoned him at every turn. Today, Seth Ralph had put forth his final condition. Not just Salma, but Rukhsana and Jamila too must become servants in his house. Karam Din was exhausted. But could a father ever surrender? "Allah, show me a way." But in response, there was only silence. Seth Ralph smirked, his amusement growing. "What are you thinking, old man? Will your daughters starve to death? Or will they eat respectably in my house?" Karam Din steadied his heart. He looked at Salma, Rukhsana, and Jamila with pained eyes. Their faces were filled with terror. Salma was crying, Jamila was trembling, and Rukhsana sat on the ground in a daze. One last thought crossed his mind. If he said yes, his daughters would become slaves. If he said no, they would die of hunger. But there was a third option. And that night, Karam Din made a decision. Karam Din was on the ground, but a new fire awakened inside him. He suddenly stood up. "I will drag you to court, Seth Ralph." Seth Ralph's smirk disappeared. "What? Yes. You may be a rich man, but the law does not work for you." Karam Din's voice thundered through the silent night. "I will go to the judge. I will tell the people how you exploit the daughters of the poor." At first, Seth Ralph was furious. But then, his smirk returned. "Who will listen to you, Karam Din?" He said coldly. "You are just a poor man. In court, money speaks, not the truth. But in Allah's court, only the truth speaks, Ralph." Karam Din took a step forward. He had no weapons. His only strength was his truth. 2 days later, the entire neighborhood stood with Karam Din. The people raised their voices against Seth Ralph's tyranny. The case reached the city's highest judge. And then, the day came. A day that left everyone stunned. Seth Ralph was removed from his position of power. His business collapsed. A case was filed against him. His own allies abandoned him. And Karam Din? For the first time, he stood before his daughters with his head held high. He was still poor, but he was honorable. He had fought for his daughters, and in the end, even fate had to surrender. This wasn't just the story of one poor father. It was the story of every person who is forced into hardship but never gives up. Did this story touch your heart? If yes, let us know.